Hello everyone, Kurt Holford here, and welcome back to another episode of Holford Labs. Today, we are going to start our discussions of how to utilize and what is the rondel dagger. And again, this is a trainer that I picked up a long time ago. It's got a little bit of rust on it. It's been used quite a bit as far as for training purposes and whatnot. But I want to talk about what this tool of war was, and also a little bit about talk about the striking mechanisms. Now before, I know we talked a little bit before about the different dagger grips and everything else, and like how you do certain things. We're going to be looking at that a little bit more here as well, a little bit later on. But today, I really want to focus on what I think the dagger strikes are, what they aren't, and essentially what are we trying to do in these cases. Because remember, the big thing that I think that we're not necessarily always considering is that, again, if my hypothesis is correct, then we're always trying to get to one of the posta in the very beginning of any of the of all the abrazare sections. Like I said, that's the thing right here. He has said that essentially is those are the core. That those things go over to every application later on in the book. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about what dagger striking is and so on and so forth, and maybe a little bit tie back into what we talked about before about the four posta of abrazare and some of the strengths and weaknesses that we have in there. So with that being the case here, let's roll the tape. So the rondel dagger, as I've come to understand and based on my own research, this is not an everyday utility knife. I've seen some people put out there that this is a military knife, this is a specialist knife, this is, and I honestly think that there is something to that. Again, this is a trainer. I have other ones that are really scary. And having done tests with male and having seen videos of people doing tests with males, these things are incredibly effective. They're great, and they're basic, they're simple. I personally think that there's also kind of a Roman lineage thing that we're kind of seeing here, which is very kind of ties back to the gladius. That's for more tinfoil hat time out there, what we put out there. Again, like I think that this is an evolution of the Roman gladius, and well, we'll go into that later today. Let's talk about the dagger today. So the dagger, what this thing is and what this thing isn't. Although some of them have edges on this, I don't believe that was the intent of purpose. Yes, of course, slashing is the thing, all these other things out there. But the main thing that this dagger is made for is for puncturing, placing, and stabbing under certain areas right here. If you've ever worn armor out there, then you may know that you wear your chainmail skirt this way. You can stab that into a space right here where it hits into the hip. And yes, that will go into the meat. However, if you stab right here, you might hit somebody's folds or armor that just kind of glances off. If you hit here on mine, you're hitting my leg harness. So you're not actually hitting me. So what I think dagger strikes are and what they aren't is a lot more about tip. You're talking about kind of like craning in, like that water bird out there, right? So we're talking about this kind of action. We're not talking about stabbing like this, like it's like a modern day knife out there. We're talking about getting under and up, or over and down, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. The four postures that we talked about in at the very beginning of all this was, the strengths about, posta longa, dente di cingaro, porta di ferro, and posta frontale, right? One of the things I talked about before had to deal with posta longa, and how in posta longa here, my right foot's forward, my hand's out, and this foot's kind of turned a little bit. This is the longest I'll ever be. This is also the strongest I'll ever be with one hand, right? So up until this point, I've kind of turned. So if we're looking at dente di cingaro, frontale, porta di ferro, coming up, right? That kind of action. Well, if we're talking about coming from porta di ferro, I'm going to go on this side here, it's a little bit easier. Actually, it's probably better on this side. I'm going from porta di ferro here, out and then down. This is what we're talking about here. So the blows of Fiore's dagger are fendentes, mezzanis, and he never calls it this. I personally call it the sultani line, which is the lower quarter. And this is the image right here that he shows as far as where to hit somebody with a dagger as per the Getty. Anatomically speaking, you can look at, you can do all your research on that yourself here. I'm not here to talk about that, but again, these areas that he's telling people to strike in, it changes up the nature of what is happening here. So we're not just trying to come up here and tap, 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 tap. We're not trying to fence with the dagger here. This is meant to be a very serious in-shot kind of a concept. These areas that Fiore is telling you to strike are areas to finish a fight very fast. Or in armor, to dig it into a space on the person so that you have a handle and you can manipulate inside of them with this knife. Really effective combat tool at the time. So with that being the case here, we're going to talk about the blows and what I think they are and what I don't think they are. So we're talking about the fendente line here, which is where he talks about coming up high here and stabbing to the top of the head on the person, right? And what that might look like is this. I don't think it's a pop to the face this way. I think it is, I'm coming down into the skull. I'm coming like this. And even though we talk about into the skull, one thing that Fiore, I think, is he's not necessarily talking about head strikes here. If I hit here to the top, I can slide down, and now I've got a spot where this is coming into a really bad spot where you're not really armored naturally. So right here, along your neck, yeah, there's meat there, but there's not a lot of protection when it comes down to like your skeletal structure. So coming down into this area here is a lot easier to come in as far as an effective knife strike, and not just to sit there and go bop, hit the person here. I'm not saying that that's not a thing. I'm saying as far as what I think this guy's trying to say here is trying to target the head as far as like, I'm gonna hit the top of the head here, that's exactly what I'm poked for. He's kind of way after. Anything, I think he's saying strike to the head. If it goes in, great. But that's not the point. It goes here and it slides down into a spot that is dangerous. Okay. So that's kind of the concept of the roundel dagger. The fendente line, I see is coming out. And if I'm back here, I'm going to take that, use that mezzovolta. I'm down in porta di ferro here. So I'm in porta di ferro single. I'm coming up, come back here. I'm going back into dente di cingaro, into posta longa. So I'm utilizing that big turns. And of course, there's always just this. And I'm not saying that there's not. But again, we're talking about really being able to get your power in there. And even just by coming here, I'm bringing my hands up, utilizing dente di cingaro, which I think is more about this motion, like your arms moving, and then placing. Downward to stab. The next one that we have is your mezzani. And there's two mezzani. We have the mandrito, the right side, and the reverso, which is the left side. What I think these things are, again, he shows you, as far in the book, he talks about targeting up from the elbow to the temple. I don't think that is us doing this right here. That's already a bad position. Not saying that you can't do it. I think it's a lot less angle. So instead of being like this, we're not doing half sides here. We're just kind of coming to the side. Here, here. So I'm here, cross. It's angled. And the thing that makes this angle, you see how my tip is in the face. So rather than before I'm coming like this, we're starting to see the tip coming this way. This is a very important piece when it comes down to the covering mechanisms of the dagger. Because just going in like this, with my hands open, we start talking about some of the remedy masters, well, that locks you out of place, right? So this right here, it doesn't do anything. The person that's coming like this is still threatening me. So when if I cover this up this way, if it's off to the side here, well, why am I bothering with the dagger? But if the dagger is turned in, as you can see here, it's still in towards my body. I have to worry about that. If I let go of this, it's going to go into me. So how I see mandrito and revesi is coming up. Here is this motion. And again, I'm coming over. Here comes the knife. Out. Down. Downing here. This is your point of structure through and through. This. Forward hand, backhand. And the backhand, this is a lot easier to turn this way, which allows me to step back up. So I can still come down this way with that reveso shot. This is where it gets a little bit interesting too, because in this ice pick grip, if you will, I also have, I can go low, which you'll notice is going up. And it's very important too, because if I go straight down with this, then in a heightened situation, I just stab myself. So going across. This is what I think he means by with utilizing the knife. It's very effective that way. I can go this way, I can go horizontal, this way, come back up. That's what we're talking about here. If I'm going to utilize the elongated grip, this grip, where now my dagger's forward, now we're talking about that Soltani line, that lower quarter. And again, if I'm trying to poke like this, you can see the structure's already weak. We're talking about coming up and under. Right? And this could be to the armpit, to the groin. He specifically tells us that from the bottom of the rib cage down to the groin is where you are trying to target with this kind of a knife. Right. So basics of actions right here. We talk about strike and structure right here. Big takeaways, how I see this. Again, everyone's open to their own interpretation. The strongest it will ever be is at max extension into one area. That's also the easiest time to change up trajectory. The weaker areas are when we are coming to an area, or when we are passing, or if we're coming up this way, so this is a weak point, this is a weak point. This right here is a weak point. This right here is a weak point. Here's a weak point. These are all weak points on the body, in the motion that we're hunting to try to get ourselves into position. This is very important. But these are also areas right here where I am also moving in to strike. So when I come out, I'm not trying to hit this. I'm trying to come out and down. That's the other thing too, with the fendente line, I can just bring it straight down. Fendente, Nazzani, Nazzani. Soltani, fendente, that. And you'll notice here with this, I'm using my right foot forward to kind of keep myself here. Why? This here is very weak. It's just my arm working. This is all my body working. And I have my elephant. I have my foot here to be able to move in with the knife, right? Lower position. Here. You'll see things where the hem's grabbing. Now this is different because now we're going into a form of frontale. Shifting and moving. So basics movements, basic attacks. Out, up, extend. Up, extend. Up, extend. Up, extend. Nazzani, same thing. Up, angles. Okay. This will also be very key later on. And of course, Soltani. Right? Other variant of this, Soltani, which I think is there, using the revezzo upwards into that lower quarter line. So again, easy drill. You don't need a stick. You don't need one of these right here. You can do this all by hand. Just pick your dagger hand. For the period of time, it's typically the right. Starting with that left porta di ferro, coming out and just extending. So we're coming up, dente di giro, posta longa. Dente di giro, posta longa. Posta longa. If you're already starting to see it, you're already starting to work the lines of the segno. So just more things you have to play with. So that's going to conclude as far as utilizing basic handling and striking of the dagger. So thank you so much for tuning in for this here, everyone. Again, this is just basic mechanics on the strikes that Fiore has. These concepts of fendente, mezzani, revezzo, mandrito, sultani, these are all concepts that you're going to find later out. It's already in the segno as far as the lines are concerned. These are already blows of the sword. I have a hypothesis, and we'll get there when we start talking about how I believe that this tool is actually kind of the guiding tendency. Like learning dagger is actually a close quarter skill, not just for the knife, but when you have to use the sword in one hand in certain areas. And that's more to follow out there with that. In fact, actually, if you've seen any of the armor stuff out there, you may have seen where we come up this way. I use it as long as I can, similar to the dagger strikes here, but there's points in time where I'm working that pommel like I would a dagger. Again, just your dagger work, I think, gives insight to close quarter sword combat, especially for armor. But again, with this being the case here, this is just a basic introduction to knife handling and what this thing is as far as the rondelle dagger. If you've done any training with this before, please, like I said, as always, leave a comment below. Love to hear your thoughts on this. And if this is your first time, again, take it slow. If you don't need anything, just you can use the arm. It's the very easiest way. Just be mindful that you have this thing. Don't over torque the wrist here. I think that's kind of disadvantageous, but explain with it, what you have to do with it. And if you have any questions or thought, please, like I said, leave them below. As always, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. Train well, be safe, and fight on.